The Draconic Imperium had been running the show in the Galactic Coalition for over 3,000 years. These dragons weren't just powerful, they were absolutely stunning by their own standards. Their scales sparkled like precious gems, and every part of their body matched perfectly on both sides. To them, this perfect symmetry was the ultimate measure of beauty. If you didn't look balanced and flawless, you simply weren't worth much in their eyes. When humans finally made it into space and joined the coalition, the dragons had mixed feelings about us. Sure, they admitted we were pretty handy with tools and machines. Human engineers could take apart the most complicated alien technology and put it back together better than before. But beautiful? Not even close. The dragons looked at humans the way someone might look at a useful but ugly tool. Necessary but nothing special to look at. Jake Thompson had been living on the edge of dragon territory for almost 7 years now. His repair station floated in the darkness between star systems, a small metal home where he fixed the massive warships that belonged to the Dragon fleet. Day after day, these enormous vessels would dock at his station with blown engines, damaged weapon systems, or malfunctioning life support. Jake would climb inside with his tools and make everything work again. He was good at his job. Really good. In fact, Jake had earned a reputation as the best human mechanic in 5 whole sectors of space. Dragon captains would sometimes request him specifically when their ships needed repairs. They respected his skill, nodded politely when he finished a job and paid him well. But that's where it ended. None of them invited him to their celebrations. None of them asked about his life. He was the mechanic, nothing more. Jake had gotten used to the loneliness. He'd learned to read the subtle movements in dragon body language, the slight tilt of a head that meant disappointment, the way their tail would flick when they were impatient. He understood that in their culture, physical perfection mattered more than almost anything else. A dragon with even a slightly crooked horn or a dull scale would face whispers and judgment. For a species that valued beauty so highly, humans must have seemed pretty rough around the edges. One ordinary Tuesday, if you could call any day ordinary when you lived in space, Ambassador Kiraxis showed up at the station. This wasn't unusual by itself. Kiraxis stopped by every few months to check on diplomatic relations and make sure Jake wasn't having any major problems with his dragon clients. But something was different this time. The ambassador's movements seemed careful, calculated. His emerald scales caught the light as he shifted his weight from one clawed foot to the other. Jake Thompson, Kiraxis began, his voice carrying that formal tone dragons used for official business. I come bearing an opportunity from the Dragon Emperor himself. Jake wiped the grease off his hands and gave the ambassador his full attention. When the Emperor got involved in anything, it was serious. The Dragon Emperor ruled over trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. He didn't waste time on small matters. The Emperor wishes to strengthen the bond between our species, Kiraxis continued, to show that dragons and humans can build a future together. He proposes a political marriage between you and one of his daughters. Jake's mind went blank for a second. Marriage? To a dragon princess? This had to be some kind of joke. He was a mechanic who spent most days covered in engine oil, living in a small repair station in the middle of nowhere. Dragon princesses lived in crystal palaces, attended by hundreds of servants, wearing jewelry that cost more than his entire station. Which daughter? Jake asked carefully. Kiraxis hesitated, and that hesitation told Jake everything he needed to know. Princess Vera, the Emperor's 7th daughter. Jake had been around dragons long enough to know their politics. He'd never heard of Princess Vera. Never seen her at any of the official ceremonies that got broadcast across the coalition networks. Never heard dragon officers mention her name during their casual conversations. A hidden princess. One kept away from public view. Let me guess, Jake said slowly. Nobody ever sees her. The Emperor keeps her locked away somewhere. The ambassador's silence was answer enough. His tail twitched with discomfort. Jake understood immediately what was happening. This wasn't an honor. This was an insult wrapped in diplomatic language. The Emperor was offering his hidden, presumably defective daughter to a human, someone the dragons already considered inferior. It was like giving away something you didn't want anyway and pretending it was a generous gift. The Emperor could claim he was building bridges between species while actually getting rid of an embarrassment and mocking humanity at the same time. Other humans might have been offended. They might have refused outright, seeing the trap for what it was. But Jake had spent years working with dragons, learning their values, seeing how their society worked. And he'd learned something important. The things dragons threw away as worthless were often the most interesting. He'd seen it in their technology. Dragons would discard ship designs that weren't perfectly symmetrical, even if those designs were more efficient. They'd reject weapons that worked better simply because they didn't look elegant enough. Their obsession with beauty made them blind to value. "I'll sign," Jake said. Ambassador Kirax's blinked in surprise, his golden eyes widening slightly. "You accept?" "Yeah. When do I meet her?" The ambassador recovered quickly, producing a data tablet with the marriage contract already prepared. As Jake scanned through the formal language and legal terms, he noticed several dragons from the station had gathered near the docking bay. Word traveled fast. They were watching, whispering to each other, their expressions mixing amusement with pity. Jake pressed his thumb to the signature panel. The contract glowed blue, then disappeared into the coalition database. The watching dragons laughed quietly among themselves. To them, this confirmed what they'd always thought about humans. We were so desperate for status that we'd accept even the Emperor's garbage. We were too simple to understand when we were being mocked. But Jake just smiled to himself as he went back to work on the engine he'd been repairing. He'd seen too many broken things become beautiful when given the right attention. The transport ship arrived 3 days after Jake signed the contract. It was a small, unmarked vessel, the kind usually reserved for cargo or waste disposal, not for royalty. Jake watched through the station's observation window as it docked. No ceremonial flags flew from its hull. No honor guard accompanied it. Even the pilot seemed eager to finish the job and leave as quickly as possible. When the airlock finally opened, 6 dragon guards emerged first. Their scales gleamed with perfect symmetry, each one a showcase of draconic beauty standards. But something was off about their behavior. They kept their eyes forward, refusing to look back at the transport. Their body language screamed discomfort, like they were escorting something shameful. One of them actually shuddered as he stepped aside to let the passenger through. Then Princess Vera emerged and Jake's breath caught in his throat. He'd expected something unusual. Maybe a few crooked scales or a slight deformity. What he saw instead was unlike any dragon he'd ever encountered. Vera's scales didn't flow in the uniform, symmetrical patterns that dragons prized so highly. Instead, they swirled across her body in chaotic spirals and waves, creating designs that seemed almost impossible. The left side of her body shimmered with deep purple scales that caught the light like amethyst, while her right side displayed scales of midnight blue that seemed to absorb the surrounding glow. Her face broke every rule of draconic beauty. One eye blazed silver, bright and sharp as a star. The other glowed gold, warm and deep. Her horns didn't match at all. The left one curved backward in a graceful arc, while the right one twisted forward and slightly to the side. By dragon logic, this should have made her look broken, unfinished. But Jake found himself staring because the effect was mesmerizing, like looking at a piece of art that shouldn't work but somehow did. Her wings were the most striking feature. The left wing spread out in crimson red, the color of fresh blood or a sunset. The right wing was pure obsidian black, like a piece of night sky had been shaped into flight. They were completely different sizes too, the black wing slightly larger than the red one. According to everything Jake knew about dragon physiology, those wings shouldn't have worked together. The imbalance should have made flight impossible. Yet she'd flown down from the transport with perfect grace, her mismatched wings moving in a rhythm that defied physics and dragon expectations alike. The guards couldn't get away fast enough. They deposited her single travel case, just one bag for a princess, and retreated to their ship without a word. Within minutes, the transport was undocking, its engines firing up urgently like the crew couldn't stand to be there another second. Vera stood in the docking bay completely still. She held herself with rigid formality, her asymmetrical head high despite everything. When she finally spoke, her voice was clear and controlled, but Jake could hear the weight of 3 centuries of shame beneath the words. "I understand this arrangement humiliates you, human. My father wishes to rid himself of me while appearing generous. You may treat me as you wish, I expect nothing." She said it like she'd rehearsed the speech 1,000 times. Like she'd prepared herself for cruelty, for disgust, for whatever treatment a human might give to a dragon they'd been tricked into marrying. Her mismatched eyes met his, and Jake saw something that made his chest tighten. She truly believed she was worthless. Jake walked forward and offered his hand, palm up, in the human gesture of greeting and friendship. Vera stared at it like she didn't understand what was happening. "Jake Thompson," he said simply. "Welcome to my station. You hungry? I make a decent stir-fry." The princess blinked, both eyes, silver and gold, widening in confusion. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked down at his outstretched hand, then back at his face, searching for some sign of mockery or trap. "You're offering me food?" Her voice lost some of its formal edge, replaced by genuine bewilderment. Yeah. It's been a long trip, right? You probably haven't eaten anything good in hours. Come on, I've got fresh vegetables from the last supply run, and I'm pretty proud of my cooking. Vera's tail, which had been wrapped tightly around her legs in a defensive posture, relaxed slightly. You are not disgusted? By what? Jake gestured toward the living quarters. Come on, I'll show you around while we cook. Fair warning though, the kitchen's pretty small. We'll have to work together. She followed him slowly, her mismatched wings folded carefully against her back to fit through the station's human-sized corridors. Jake noticed she moved with practiced precision, making herself smaller, taking up less space. Habits formed from years of trying to be invisible. The kitchen was indeed cramped, designed for one person at most. Jake pulled out vegetables and started chopping while explaining how the station worked. Vera watched him with intense focus, like she was trying to solve a complicated puzzle. Why did you agree to this marriage? She finally asked. Surely you knew what I was. The broken one. The Emperor's shame. Jake paused his chopping and looked at her directly. You want the honest answer? Because I've been fixing dragon ships for 7 years, and I've learned something important. Dragons throw away the most interesting stuff because it doesn't match their rules. I've found ship designs in their scrap heaps that worked better than anything in their active fleet. They junked them because they weren't symmetrical enough. He resumed cutting the vegetables, his knife moving in quick, efficient strokes. So when the Emperor offered me his hidden daughter, the one he's ashamed of, I figured she was probably the most interesting person in his whole family. Vera was silent for a long moment. Then, so quietly Jake almost missed it, no one has ever called me interesting before. Well, get used to it. Jake slid the cutting board toward her along with a knife. Here you can help. Just chop these into whatever size feels right. She picked up the knife with her asymmetrical claws, one set slightly longer than the other, another deformity by dragon standards. But Jake noticed immediately that the variation actually gave her more precision. She could grip the knife at different angles, make cuts that would be awkward with perfectly matched claws. They cooked together in comfortable silence, the smell of garlic and vegetables filling the small kitchen. When Jake added the sauce, Vera's gold eye caught the light, and he saw something he hadn't seen before, a tiny spark of hope, fragile as spider silk. This station, she said carefully, what do you do here exactly? I fix things. Mostly dragon warships, but sometimes civilian vessels, cargo haulers, whatever needs work. Jake stirred the stir-fry, adjusting the heat. Why? I have studied engineering. In my isolation there was little else to do. I memorized technical specifications, learned system designs, calculated efficiency improvements. She paused. I was never allowed to apply any of it. Jake turned to look at her fully. You know ship engineering? Every class in the coalition fleet. I can recite power output specifications, weapon system tolerances, shield frequency ranges. Her voice grew stronger. I designed 17 improvements to standard Dragon cruiser layouts. None were ever reviewed. A smile spread across Jake's face. Princess Vera, I think this marriage is going to work out better than either of us expected. News traveled through the Dragon networks faster than lightspeed communications. Within a week, every Dragon in 5 sectors knew that the human mechanic had actually married the Emperor's hidden daughter. The one nobody talked about. The broken princess with mismatched everything. The mockery started immediately. Dragon officers would dock at nearby stations and send messages to their friends, laughing about the pathetic human who didn't even realize he'd been insulted. Social media across the Draconic Imperium lit up with jokes and memes. Some showed edited images of Jake with exaggerated features, paired with crude drawings of Vera. Others made bets on how long it would take before Jake divorced her and crawled back to the Emperor, begging for a real dragon wife. The Imperial court was particularly vicious. Noble dragons who'd spent centuries perfecting their appearance found the whole situation hilarious. Lady Zyrith, known for her flawless emerald scales, hosted a dinner party where the entire entertainment was reading aloud the marriage contract and imagining the human's horror when he first saw his bride. Lord Caven commissioned a sculpture showing a confused human standing next to a distorted dragon figure, which he displayed prominently in his palace garden. Jake saw some of the posts and messages. He deleted them without comment and went back to work. Vera saw them too, though she tried to hide it. Jake would sometimes catch her staring at her reflection in the polished metal walls, her mismatched eyes filled with old pain. But then something unexpected started happening. The repair jobs got done faster. Much faster. A cargo hauler that Jake had estimated would take 3 weeks was ready in 9 days. A military scout ship with a completely fried navigation system, the kind of job that usually meant stripping everything down to the frame and rebuilding from scratch, was operational in 5 days. It was all because of Vera. Her mind worked differently than any dragon Jake had ever met. Where symmetrical dragons saw problems in linear, balanced ways, Vera saw connections and solutions that seemed to come from nowhere. She'd look at a malfunctioning engine and immediately spot a fix that violated every standard repair protocol but worked perfectly. One morning, a dragon captain brought in a frigate with a damaged power coupling. It was a common problem with a standard solution that took about 2 days. Jake was already pulling up the repair manual when Vera examined the system for 10 minutes and suggested rerouting the power flow through an auxiliary system that wasn't even designed for that purpose. "That shouldn't work," Jake said, studying her proposed diagram. "It shouldn't," Vera agreed, her silver eye gleaming with excitement. "But the auxiliary system has excess capacity that's never used. If we modify the connection points here and here, the power flow will actually be more stable than the original design." They tried it. The repair took 6 hours instead of 2 days, and the ship's power efficiency increased by 8%. The captain was so impressed he told 3 other captains who told their friends who started showing up at Jake's station specifically requesting the new repair team. Within a month, Jake's station had a waiting list. Captains were willing to wait extra days just to have their ships worked on by the human and his strange dragon wife. The mockery online started to shift. Some dragons began defending Vera, pointing out the objective improvements in repair times and efficiency. Arguments broke out in comment sections. Traditional dragons insisted that proper symmetrical methods were superior, while younger dragons started questioning why they should care about appearance if asymmetrical thinking got better results. Then came the Dreadnought. The Sovereign's Fist was one of the oldest warships in the Dragon Fleet, a massive vessel that had served for over 400 years. Its power core had finally failed catastrophically, and 3 different engineering teams had declared it beyond repair. The cost to build a replacement would run into the hundreds of millions of credits. The ship was scheduled to be dismantled for scrap. Admiral Torvin, the fleet commander overseeing the dismantling process, decided to stop at Jake's station for routine maintenance on his personal cruiser. While his ship was being serviced, Jake mentioned the Dreadnought case, mostly making conversation. "Shame about the Sovereign's Fist," Jake said while checking the cruiser's fuel lines. "Beautiful ship." "A necessary loss," Torvin replied, his perfect golden scales catching the station's lights. Every scale on his body matched perfectly, arranged in flawless geometric patterns. He was the epitome of dragon beauty standards, which made him particularly traditional in his views. Some things cannot be repaired. Vera, who'd been working on the other side of the cruiser, spoke up. "I've reviewed the damage reports. The ship could be saved." Torvin's head swiveled toward her, and Jake saw the exact moment the Admiral recognized who she was. His eyes widened slightly, then narrowed with barely concealed disgust. "You are the Emperor's 7th daughter." "I am," Vera said calmly, though Jake noticed her wings tucked tighter against her body. "Then you should know your place is not in an engineering bay making absurd claims about ships that real engineers have already evaluated." Torvin's voice dripped with condescension. "The Sovereign's Fist is dead. Accept reality." Jake felt his jaw tighten, but before he could say anything, Vera moved to a nearby console and pulled up the Dreadnought's schematics. Her asymmetrical claws flew across the interface, highlighting sections and pulling up data streams. "The main power core is destroyed, yes," she said, her voice steady and professional. "But the ship has 7 auxiliary cores that are still functional. The engineering teams tried to boost them to replace the main core, which is why they failed. Auxiliary cores aren't designed for that load. However, if you redesign the power distribution network to treat all 7 cores as equal partners rather than trying to make them emulate a single main core, the combined output exceeds what the ship needs." She brought up a complex diagram showing power flow patterns that looked nothing like standard dragon ship design. Instead of the symmetrical, radial patterns dragons preferred, her design showed an irregular web of connections that somehow balanced perfectly despite looking chaotic. "This is nonsense," Torvin scoffed. "Power distribution requires symmetrical load balancing. Your design would tear itself apart." "Would it?" Vera's golden eye fixed on him. "Or does it only look wrong because you're expecting symmetry? The mathematics prove the design is stable. The load distribution is uneven but complementary. Each core compensates for the other's variations." "I don't have time for this." Torvin turned away from her dismissively. He looked directly at Jake. "Human, I need to speak with the real engineer here. Not your wife." The way he said wife made it clear what he thought of the marriage. Jake had dealt with plenty of arrogant dragons over the years, but this casual cruelty toward Vera, someone who just tried to help, made his blood boil. "Admiral," Jake said, his voice carefully controlled, "she is the real engineer. I'm just the guy with the tools." Torvin's scales rippled with indignation. "You dare to?" "I dare to tell you the truth." Jake stood up to his full height, which was still shorter than the dragon but felt important anyway. "My wife just handed you a solution that could save your fleet hundreds of millions of credits. The least you could do is look at it instead of dismissing her because she doesn't look the way you think she should." The Admiral's tail lashed back and forth, a sign of anger in dragon body language. For a moment, Jake thought Torvin might do something aggressive. But dragons respected boldness, even from humans, and insulting an admiral's intelligence by suggesting he was too biased to see a good idea was a calculated risk. "Fine," Torvin hissed. "Send me the supposed solution. When it fails peer review, I expect an apology." He left without another word, his perfect scales gleaming as he walked away. 2 weeks after the confrontation with Admiral Torvin, Jake's station received an urgent contract. A coalition defense fleet needed emergency repairs before deploying to the border territories where pirate activity had been increasing. 6 ships, all requiring significant work, and they needed to be combat-ready within 72 hours. It was the kind of job that would normally require 3 stations working together. But the fleet commander had specifically requested Jake's station. Word had gotten around about their speed and efficiency. The pay was incredible but the timeline was brutal. Jake and Vera threw themselves into the work. They brought in temporary crews, dragon engineers who'd heard about their methods and wanted to learn. The station became a constantly moving operation, with workers cycling through sleep shifts while repairs continued around the clock. Sparks flew from welding torches at all hours. The smell of hot metal and electrical work filled every corridor. Vera was everywhere at once, her asymmetrical form moving between ships, checking progress, solving problems that stumped the other engineers. Jake watched her gain confidence with each passing day. She'd started giving orders naturally, and the younger dragon engineers actually listened. They'd see her unusual approach to a problem, try to solve it the traditional way, fail, then come back and ask her to explain her method. By the end of the second day they were ahead of schedule. 4 ships were already finished, and the remaining 2 were progressing smoothly. Jake allowed himself to feel optimistic. They might actually pull this off. That's when everything went wrong. Jake was inside one of the ships, running final diagnostics on a weapons system, when he felt something strange. A slight lightness in his steps. Then his feet left the floor entirely. Tools started floating past his face. Through the ship's intercom, he heard confused shouts from multiple locations. The station's gravity generator had failed. Jake's first thought was mechanical failure, but that didn't make sense. He'd personally serviced that generator 3 weeks ago. It was running perfectly. Then he heard Vera's voice over the main communication channel, sharp and urgent. This wasn't an accident. Someone manually overrode the safety protocols. The generator was shut down deliberately. Sabotage. Someone had sabotaged them during the most critical repair job they'd ever handled. The station descended into chaos. In the main repair bay, dozens of tools, parts, and pieces of equipment that had been carefully organized on work tables were now floating freely through the air. Delicate sensor components bumped into heavy wrenches. Explosive fuel cells drifted dangerously close to active welding equipment. It was a nightmare of floating hazards. The dragon workers panicked immediately. Dragons were built for atmospheric flight. Their symmetrical wings and balanced bodies let them soar gracefully through air. But zero gravity was completely different. Without air resistance and ground reference, their perfect symmetry became a disadvantage. They tumbled uncontrollably, their wings flapping uselessly, making their spinning worse. Several dragons grabbed onto whatever they could reach and held on desperately, too disoriented to move. Jake at least had training for this. Every human who worked in space went through extensive zero-gravity operations courses. He oriented himself, found a handhold, and started pulling himself toward the main bay using the corridor's safety rails. His movements were efficient but not fast. Human bodies weren't designed for zero-G either, but at least he knew the techniques. Then he saw Vera and his breath caught. She wasn't struggling. She wasn't panicking. She was flying. Her mismatched wings, the crimson and obsidian wings that every dragon had mocked as useless and broken, moved in a pattern Jake had never seen before. The red wing made small, rapid adjustments while the black wing swept in longer, powerful strokes. The asymmetry that made atmospheric flight difficult gave her perfect three-dimensional control in microgravity. She could spin, stop, change direction instantly. She moved through the zero-G environment like she'd been born for it. A young dragon engineer named HFY was tumbling end over end, his perfectly symmetrical wings making his rotation worse with every panicked flap. He was spinning directly toward an exposed plasma manifold, a piece of equipment that could flash burn him severely on contact. He saw it coming, screamed but couldn't stop his momentum. Vera shot across the bay like a missile. Her mismatched wings adjusted mid-flight, letting her intercept HFY's tumbling path. She grabbed him with her asymmetrical claws, the ones that dragons had always called deformed, and those very claws with their different lengths, let her grip him from multiple angles simultaneously. Her wings beat in that strange, uneven rhythm, killing their combined momentum in seconds. But they were still drifting toward the manifold. Vera twisted her body, used her black wing to push against a floating crate, and sent them both safely toward a wall where HFY could grab a handhold. The whole rescue took maybe 5 seconds. "Hold on tight," Vera told the shaking young dragon. "Don't move until we restore gravity." She didn't wait for his thanks. A delicate sensor array, worth more than Jake's entire station, was tumbling toward a cluster of sharp metal debris. Vera dove after it, her wings making micro-adjustments that let her navigate through the floating obstacles. She caught the sensor array in her wrong claws, the ones that gripped at odd angles, and those angles let her cradle the delicate equipment perfectly while still having mobility. Another dragon was spinning near the ceiling, hyperventilating, on the edge of complete panic. Vera reached him, pressed her forehead against his, a dragon gesture of trust and calm, and guided him to safety with gentle precision. Jake made it to the main engineering panel and started working on restoring gravity. The override was sophisticated, not something done by an amateur. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had planned this. While he worked, he watched Vera through the bay window. She was rescuing everyone. Every panicked dragon, every floating piece of critical equipment, every potential disaster, she handled it all. Her asymmetrical body, built wrong by every dragon standard, was perfect for this. The very features that had made her a shame to the Empire were saving lives. A fuel cell was drifting toward an active electrical panel. Vera spotted it, calculated the angle, and bounced off a wall to intercept. She grabbed the fuel cell in one claw, used her wings to stabilize, then carefully navigated through the floating chaos to secure it in a safety container. Jake got the backup gravity system online. It kicked in gradually to avoid hurting anyone. As weight returned, dragons who'd been floating helplessly drifted down to the floor. Equipment settled. The chaos resolved into stillness. Every dragon in that bay was staring at Vera. She hovered for a moment longer, her mismatched wings still moving in that beautiful, impossible pattern, before gravity pulled her down to land gracefully on the deck. Young HFY approached her slowly, his scales still pale from fear. "You saved my life. Your wings, the way you moved, I've never seen anything like it." "Neither have I," admitted another engineer, an older dragon named Thyra. "In atmosphere, symmetrical wings are superior. But in zero-G." She trailed off, her mind clearly recalculating everything she'd believed about dragon anatomy. Jake joined them, his tablet showing the sabotage data. Someone accessed the gravity controls remotely. They used Admiral Torvin's personal security codes. The dragons exchanged glances. Everyone knew what that meant. The admiral who'd mocked Vera, who dismissed her redesign of the dreadnought, had tried to destroy her reputation, and maybe even caused deaths in the process, to prove she was worthless. But all he'd proven was that she was extraordinary. The security footage of Vera's zero-gravity rescue went viral across the entire coalition network within hours. Someone on the repair crew had recorded everything and uploaded it before anyone could stop them. By morning, billions of beings across hundreds of worlds had watched the broken princess save lives with the very features that were supposed to make her worthless. The dragon networks exploded with discussion. Traditional nobles tried to downplay it, claiming anyone could move in zero-G with enough practice. But younger dragons weren't buying it. They shared the footage again and again, analyzing every movement, every wing adjustment, every impossible maneuver. Physics experts started breaking down why asymmetrical wings would actually provide superior zero-G control. Medical professionals discussed how varied claw lengths offered better grip flexibility. The conversation was shifting and not everyone was happy about it. 3 days after the incident, Jake was replacing a power coupling when his station's proximity alarms went off. A massive Imperial flagship was approaching, the kind of ship that carried only the highest-ranking dragons. The vessel was pristine, its hull decorated with gold inlays that caught the light of distant stars. This was a ship built to impress, to remind everyone who had power. The Dragon Emperor himself was coming. Jake's heart sank. He knew what this meant. The Emperor had tolerated the marriage when it was a joke, when his daughter was hidden away with some nobody human. But now Vera was famous. Now people were questioning the very foundations of dragon beauty standards. The Emperor would want to contain this situation before it got worse. The flagship docked with the station's main port, and the Emperor emerged surrounded by guards. He was massive even by dragon standards, his scales of flawless platinum that seemed to glow with inner light. Every scale was perfectly symmetrical, perfectly placed, perfectly sized. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd ruled trillions of lives for over 1,000 years. Power radiated from him like heat from a star. Jake had never been this close to someone so important. Part of him wanted to step back, to bow, to show the proper respect. But a bigger part of him knew exactly why the Emperor was here, and that made him angry enough to stand his ground. "I have come for my daughter," the Emperor announced, his voice deep and commanding. He didn't bother with greetings or pleasantries. "This arrangement has run its course. Vera will return to the Imperial Palace where she belongs." Jake stepped forward, positioning himself between the Emperor and the corridor that led to the workshop where Vera was currently working. "No." The word hung in the air like a physical thing. The guards' eyes widened. One of them actually gasped. In 3,000 years of Imperial rule, probably nobody had ever said no to the Dragon Emperor so directly. The Emperor's perfect eyes fixed on Jake with an intensity that made his knees want to buckle. "You dare refuse me, human?" "Yeah, I do." Jake's voice shook slightly, but he didn't back down. "She's my wife, my partner, the best engineer I've ever worked with. You want her back? You'll have to offer her something better than what she has here." "Better than what she has?" The Emperor's laugh was cold. "She lives in a repair station. She works with grease under her claws. She spends her days with common workers. I offer her a palace, servants, wealth beyond measure." "You offer her a prison," Jake shot back. "You hid her away for 3 centuries because she didn't match your idea of perfect. Now she's out here saving lives, revolutionizing ship design, and actually using the brilliant mind you ignored. Yeah, her claws have grease under them, because she's actually doing something important." The Emperor's scales rippled, a sign of barely controlled anger. He moved past Jake as if the human was nothing more than an annoying obstacle. His guards followed, their perfect forms a stark contrast to the utilitarian metal corridors of the station. They found Vera in the main workshop, working on a complex engine assembly. Her asymmetrical scales were indeed smudged with grease. Her mismatched claws held tools that left dark stains. She looked nothing like a princess, and everything like someone who mattered. She saw her father and straightened but didn't bow. Jake noticed that difference immediately. The old Vera would have bowed, would have made herself smaller. This Vera met her father's gaze directly. "Daughter," the Emperor said, his voice shifting to something gentler but still commanding. "I have come to bring you home. This experiment has caused enough disruption. You will return to the palace where you will be cared for properly." "Cared for?" Vera's golden eye caught the workshop lights. "Or hidden away again. Kept in comfortable rooms where no one has to see me, and remember that perfection isn't the only way to be valuable? I am your father and your emperor. I command you to." "No." That single word from Vera carried more weight than any speech. The Emperor actually stepped back, shock breaking through his careful control. "I have spent 300 years being told I was broken," Vera continued, her voice steady and clear. 300 years hearing that my asymmetry made me worthless. That my mismatched eyes were shameful. That my different wings meant I was a mistake. She gestured around the workshop, at the half-repaired ships, at the tools and equipment. Jake showed me I was simply different. My asymmetry lets me solve problems symmetrical minds miss. My mismatched wings saved lives in zero gravity. My wrong claws can reach places and grip things that perfect claws cannot." "You are being foolish," the Emperor said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Throwing away your birthright for what? To be a mechanic?" "To be myself," Vera said simply. "To be valued for what I can do instead of hidden for how I look. I won't go back to being invisible." The workshop was silent except for the hum of machinery. Jake watched the Emperor's face, seeing emotions flicker across those perfect features. Anger, confusion, and something that might have been shame. "Show me," the Emperor finally said. "Show me what you have built here that is worth abandoning your family." Vera glanced at Jake, who nodded. She led her father through the station, explaining their work. She showed him the repair schedules, demonstrating how they'd cut average repair time by 60%. She pulled up the redesign for the dreadnought that 3 engineering teams had declared unsalvageable. The Sovereign's Fist is operational again, she said, displaying the power distribution network she designed. It passed all combat readiness tests yesterday. The design I created, the one Admiral Torvin called nonsense, saved your fleet 300 million credits. The Emperor studied the asymmetrical power flow patterns, his perfect eyes moving across the screen. Jake could almost see him fighting against centuries of ingrained belief that symmetry was superior. They moved to the repair bay where several young dragon engineers were working. When they saw Vera, they stopped and approached respectfully. Not out of fear or obligation, out of genuine respect. "Princess Vera," said Arwex, the young dragon she'd saved during the sabotage. "I was hoping you could review my work on the shield generator alignment. I tried using the asymmetrical approach you taught us, but I'm not sure I calculated the load distribution correctly." Vera examined his work, made a few suggestions, and Arwex thanked her enthusiastically before returning to his task. 2 other engineers approached with questions. They spoke to her as a teacher, a mentor, someone they actually wanted to learn from. The Emperor watched all of this in silence. When they returned to the main office, he stood at the window looking out at the stars for a long time. "For 3,000 years, he finally said, the Imperium has measured worth by symmetry and beauty. We have bred for perfection, created laws around aesthetic standards, built an entire civilization on the idea that balanced form equals superior function." He turned to look at his daughter. "And in doing so, we may have been blind to other kinds of value. You think?" Jake couldn't help the sarcasm, though he immediately regretted it when the Emperor's guards tensed. But the Emperor just laughed, a real laugh, not the cold one from before. "The human has courage. I see why you chose to stay with him, daughter." "I didn't choose to stay with him," Vera corrected. "I chose to stay with myself. Jake was just the first person who let me be who I actually am." The Emperor was quiet again, his tail moving slowly in what Jake had learned was a sign of deep thought in dragons. "I cannot undo 3 centuries of wrong in a single conversation. I cannot repair the damage I did by hiding you away, by teaching you that you were shameful." "No," Vera agreed. "You cannot. But perhaps." The Emperor pulled out a data tablet, his claws moving across the interface. "Perhaps I can begin to make things right. I am commissioning a new research facility. It will focus on hybrid technologies, combining human innovation with dragon engineering. The facility will need a director. Someone who thinks differently. Someone who sees solutions that traditional minds miss." He held out the tablet to Vera. She took it, her mismatched eyes scanning the official document. "You would run this facility jointly with your human partner," the Emperor continued. "Full funding. Access to any resources you need. The authority to hire who you wish and pursue whatever research you deem valuable." He paused. "And publicly, it will be announced that you are taking this position because your unique perspective makes you the most qualified dragon in the Imperium for this work." Vera's wings, one crimson, one obsidian, trembled slightly. "You would admit publicly that asymmetry has value?" "I would admit publicly that I was wrong," the Emperor said. "And that my daughter is brilliant despite my failure to see it." Jake watched Vera's face, seeing emotions play across her asymmetrical features. Hope, caution, old pain warring with new possibilities. "I accept," she said finally. "On one condition. The facility must actively recruit dragons who don't meet traditional beauty standards. The ones currently being hidden away like I was." The Emperor nodded slowly. "Agreed." 6 months later, the Coalition Science Council gathered for a major announcement. The hybrid research facility had developed a breakthrough in faster-than-light travel using what they called asymmetrical optimization principles. The lead researcher, Princess Vera, presented her findings to a room full of dragons, humans, and dozens of other species. And throughout the Draconic Imperium, young dragons with crooked horns, mismatched scales, and asymmetrical wings started emerging from their hidden rooms. They saw Vera on their screens, successful, valued, celebrated, and realized that maybe being different wasn't the same as being broken. Jake stood at the back of the presentation hall, watching his wife explain complex quantum mechanics to an audience of thousands. She still had grease under her claws from working in the lab that morning. Her scales remained unpolished by palace standards. And she was absolutely beautiful. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.